respect to everybody's time, I'll call the March 25th, 2021 special meeting agenda or meeting together. To clarify, this is not an actual monthly or every 5-week planning board meeting. In respect to everybody's time, I'll call the March 25th, 2021 special meeting agenda or meeting together. To clarify, this is not an actual monthly or every 5-week planning board meeting. In respect to everybody's time, I'll call the March 25th, 2021 special meeting agenda or meeting together. To clarify, this is not an actual monthly or every 5-week planning board meeting. In respect to everybody's time, I'll call the March 25th, 2021 special meeting agenda or meeting together. To clarify, this is not an actual monthly or every 5-week planning. I'll call the March 25th, 2021 special meeting agenda or meeting together. To clarify, this is not an actual monthly or every 5-week planning. I'll call the March 25th, 2021 special meeting agenda or meeting together. Clarify, this is not an actual monthly or every 5-week planning. That's the reason why we didn't turn the microphone on, because we didn't want
Well,
to
we're just
back and forth.
we good. If we're good with the speakers now, then I'll just keep it like this. Did you need to recognize me or anything to make sure that I'm on? Okay.
No, it's
We'll go through what a typical review looks like, what an approval looks like, and then at the end, we're going to go through some of the issues that we've had with our planning code. The fact that we have been going through the planning code for about a little over a year, and right now we're in the process of rewriting the planning code. Hopefully, repeal and replace. But either way, all the tasks city and through court. And so it's not a quick process by any means. The fact that we have been going through in your little packet that I've got for you here, I've got a 2021 calendar. In your columns kind of go through what each of our deadlines are through our 5-week review cycle. And then your rows going across, you can see basically each cycle. In your little packet, we've got 11 cycles this year, not quite 12 since they're 5 weeks. Kind of, but all that'll make more sense as we keep going. Next up, I've got a CUP submittal checklist, and this is the CUP application. And on the front page there, you've got all the submittal items that are required to be turned into us by our applicants. And then following that is a single page with 15 items up top. You'll notice on the front page of the CUP application that number 8 is that they submit a letter of explanation stating the requested use and all the pertinent details of the project. Sometimes those letters are really nice. Sometimes those letters are really thin. And so, you know, rather than sitting down and basically writing the letter for every applicant that comes in, I've created a little bit of a cheat sheet in order to distribute with the CUP application. That way they know what we're looking for in that letter. And then whenever we get that letter, it's a lot easier for us to kind of weed through it and ask for changes and not forget stuff. Then following that, I've got a large scale development submittal checklist, which was very similar to a subdivision, very similar to a minor subdivision submittal, but those differences. And so with that, let me just get started with number 1 on top of my list. Following that, I've got a large scale development submittal checklist, which was very similar. Subdivision, very similar. All of you are on the zoning board of adjustments as well as the planning board, and the differences is the zoning board is always going to come first on the agenda for the night, and then the planning board will follow. And the zoning board is going to hear variances. They're going to hear zoning and rezoning matters, and they're going to another one of their functions is for interpretation of the code in case there's any questions or any disagreements between an applicant and planning staff. The ZBA will go through and make those calls. I said that the zoning board is responsible for hearing and making a determination on variances and rezoning. Well, we have full variances that need to be heard by the board, but we've also got administrative variance that we can handle in-house. We've got it in our code that we're authorized to approve these administrative variances on the spot, in-house, in the office, without bringing them through a technical review or bringing them to the zoning board 5 weeks later. But you should know that you can apply for a variance for many, many reasons. But we only have one reason that we apply administrative variances to people's projects, and that is simply building setback encroachment. And it happens. Our building setbacks aren't automatic on county properties. They're triggered whenever the property falls below 20 acres or whenever it's split since 2006. 2006 is when we adopted our zoning ordinances. And so if you've got a 25-acre property, you might not have legal setbacks on it, and you've got a carport built over on the property line, and then you go in and you split the property, and then all of a sudden setbacks are applied, and then all of a sudden you're out of compliance with that carport. And so that is one example of how we use administrative variances. And we won't be bringing those to you until our code gets changed requiring us to. Setback encroachment, not a big deal. The rezoning, however, if we were to rezone a property from single family residential to commercial or industrial or anything else like that, there would be a process by which to do that. We have one zone in the county and we have one zone defined. So we don't have another zone to rezone you to. So we don't use the zoning board of adjustments very often. In the past, they have sat concurrently, and we would just throw a variance on the regular planning board agenda. But, you know, as you kind of go through the process and as you get more acquainted with state law, it's the state law that says that we can't do that. And those boards have to sit separately. So we'll literally adjourn one meeting and then in the next breath, convene the next meeting. And so, so that's basically what the ZBA does, Zoning Board of Adjustments. The planning board is going to be the one that hears and makes determination on all these planning board projects, CUPs, large scale subdivisions. And all of you have been in on at least one of these, and some of us many, many more. But ultimately, the responsibility of the planning board is to provide approval or denial, or approval with conditions on all these projects that we bring to you. And then the quorum court. The quorum court is made up of all of our elected justices of the peace in 15 districts across the county. And so since zoning, even though it's only one zone, since zoning was a legislative act enacted by the quorum court in 2006, in order to change or add anything or modify that zoning for your specific piece of property, it has to go back to the quorum court for their approval, because they started it and they have to finish it also. And so if you get a CUP, which is the only project that we have that deals with zoning, and again, it's not a rezoning, a CUP is adding a zoning allowance to that property with a list of conditions that you have to adhere to for that permit to be valid and to remain valid. But since zoning was enacted by the quorum court, in order to apply a CUP to a property, the CUP has to be applied, or excuse me, has to be approved by this body and then ratified by the quorum court, even if it's a denial. Even if you deny a CUP, it still has to go to the quorum court for them to ratify it. If you approve a CUP and it gets appealed by a neighbor, for example, the appeal will go to the quorum court and they could very well deny it. And that would be a ratification of a denial of that CUP, even though you approved it. So your approval of a CUP that we know that's going to go on to the quorum court, your approval becomes a recommendation of approval to the quorum court. It's not, they don't have to go by whatever this body decides. And so.
Can we ask questions?
Absolutely, sir, please do.
So does it work the other way as well? If we recommend a denial, can they appeal that decision to the quorum court? The quorum court can approve the CUP?
Yes, all of your decisions are subject to appeal. And even a large scale or anything like that. But the appeal process from this body, if this is appealed, it goes to the quorum court, and then it can be appealed also, and then that would go on up to the circuit. And from what I understand, past circuit is Court of Appeals, and I'm not sure if it really goes beyond that. So I've never heard of it going past Court of Appeals. Yes. Yes. Yeah, yeah.
Some of your, you may think, hey, I don't want no subdivision design now. It's not really a subdivision.
Sure thing. Our county code and subdivision code and zoning code and everything is it's pretty light. You know, there's not a whole lot of detail in there, and it leaves it open to a little bit of interpretation. But what a lot of people think of when they think of subdivision, curb and gutter, street light, sidewalks, and, you know, basically 15, 20-foot separation between houses. In the county code, what subdivision means is a subdividing of the land. And it could be that you're splitting your property and creating one other lot, 4 lots or less on the plat. If you have 1 or 2 lots and you're splitting them into several more, but on your plat, if you bring a plat to us and it has 4 lots or less, we consider that a minor subdivision. 5 lots or more is a full subdivision. Now, we don't have any code that says you have to have curb and gutter, street light, sidewalks, and things like this. We do have setbacks. but we don't have a requirement of all that other stuff. All we really require on our subdivision, now not all that we require, but couple of the main things we require is satisfaction of the road code, that if these roads are going to be county roads or private roads, that those standards are reflected in the site plan on the plat. And stormwater drainage. And that's the big one. On the large scale development and the subdivision plats, we're going to require a full-blown engineered stormwater drainage report, preliminary and final. So that's before they build conceptually, and then after they build, which is the as-builds. And anytime that they're proposing to put more water onto their downstream neighbor than they already were, odds are that we're going to require them to put in a detention pond in order to slow that water before it hits their neighbors. So we're not flooding out our neighbors and, just causing plenty of civil issues between property owners and developers and us. And so, please.
Okay, so is there a limit on the number of splits? If you have a 100-acre tract that gets split into 425s, that's a minor subdivision. You take one of the 425s and split it into 4 5s, that's a minor subdivision. Is there any limit to the number of splits that can happen to a parent tract?
I'm going to write myself a little note, and I'm going to cover that in just a minute,
Okay.
whenever it's appropriate.
Okay.
Split count. The answer is yes, it's 4. But, and so let's just start and get into some of these permits. And since Mr. Shackford mentioned split count, let's go ahead and start with that one and talk about minor subdivision. Minor subdivision is whenever you're resulting in 4 lots or less. But there's so many ways that you can exempt that from going to the planning board that it really only leaves 2 ways that a minor subdivision is going to come before you. If you have a lot, say you got a 5-acre lot that's in a platted subdivision, and if you're familiar with subdivision plats, you'll know that basically the whole boundary of the subdivision is defined, and then each of the lots are defined individually within that plat, rather than one big legal description for each lot. It's a little bit different. And so in order to change anything on that one big unifying document, you've got to replat that lot that you're wanting to modify. And so a replat is going to come to you, even though it's just a simple tract split. It happens to be in a subdivision, so it's coming to you. That's a replat. And the other one, in several ways to exempt them from coming to you, is a mortgage split, court-ordered split, planning area split, family split's a big one. Where Mr. Kelsey wants to deed over 2 of his 10 acres to his daughter, and he's already exceeded his split count and he knows it, but he's deeding over a portion of his property to his daughter, and we can get a signed statement from both of them, we're good to go. We'll do that administratively in-house and you'll never see it. And we do those a lot, family splits. So there's the one way that minor subs are going to come to the planning board, which are replats. The other way is we have a code that allows you to split one, or to create one lot from your parent tract at less than 5 acres. The rest have to be 5 or more. If you're creating a 3-acre and a 2-acre lot from your 6-acre or 5-acre lot, that's a minor subdivision. You've created multiple lots at less than 5 acres. That's a minor subdivision. We're going to bring it to you, just like a replat. And the review is going to be the same. It's very similar to subdivision, full-blown subdivision review, only we don't require the stormwater drainage report and we don't require input from the fire marshal. The stormwater drainage report, we require it sometimes on conditional use permits, but on these minor subdivisions, they're so small, and it just is simply a tract split. It's just that back whenever they're writing code, most of the county outside the city limits where we have responsibility is rural, and people want to try to keep it that way. And people don't necessarily want to have a ton of 1-acre lots coming in. And so that was their solution, was bringing those to the planning board. So you've got minor subdivision, and that's a minor one. And several of our past planning board members really disliked sitting through those presentations, because truly it's a track split, you know, and there's not much more to it. So yeah. And so let's talk about split count. The split count maximum, what Mr. Shackelford was talking about. Say you've got 100 and you split it into 425s, and then you split each one of those into whatever. Well, our split count doesn't trigger until a property is split since 06 to less than 20. And so if you've got a 20-acre property, or you got a 40 and you're splitting it into two 20s, those don't count towards your split count. And so whenever I'm figuring split count, I'm going to go to the assessor's office, and I've got a 001-12345-003 parcel number on this property that I'm looking at. I'm going to search the circuit or the assessor's website for 001-12345 search without the suffix. And it's going to give me all those children from that parent. And then I'm going to start looking. And so you got 000, you know, that's the parent. You got 001. That one on that parcel card, it will say this parcel was created from 000. You go to 002, 003, same thing. Get down to 004. That one was created from 002. Well, that split count applies to all the children from 002 at that point. And it's a pain. And I have to keep a spreadsheet whenever and keep everything organized whenever I'm figuring split count, you know, just so I make sure to do it right. Because if you're just winging it, you know, it's a pain. But split count, max of 5. And if you exceed 5, minor subdivision. Split count, splitting it since 06 at less than 20. That's whenever the split count is triggered. The difference in a minor sub and a full-blown subdivision. We talked about that just a little bit, but 5 lots or more on the full subdivision. We don't have code requiring curb and gutter and street light and sidewalk and everything else. We have code that says that the driveways need to be configured such that you're not forced to back out of your driveway onto a county road. That's it. Otherwise, it's the road standard is based on the number of homes and properties that are going to be accessing that road all the way out to the public road. So if it's private, you've got 1 to 5 homes, there's going to be one standard. 6 to 10 homes, there's going to be a larger standard. 11 and more, it's got to be built to county road standard, dedicated to the county. County has to accept it. Developer has to put up their maintenance bonds. And then after a year, if the county hasn't had to do anything, they release those bonds back, and then it goes from there. But it's a public road if that road is serving more than 10 homes and lots. So the subdivision and the large scale, they're very similar, but one's residential and one isn't. But they still have preliminary and final. The applicant is going to come to us with a preliminary subdivision or a preliminary large scale proposal. If it's large scale, we don't do large scales on residential unless it's multifamily, and we don't do large scales on agricultural. But if it's other than that, you know, it's already going to have the CUP anyway. And so you're going to get the CUP and the large scale. CUP has to be approved before the large scale is heard or the subdivision is heard. It comes through in 2 phases. You got preliminary. Once you get your preliminary, your conceptual plans approved through this board, then they're free to go ahead and provide construction plans, construction documents, which would be reviewed by our county engineer and our road department. Stormwater, drainage, and roads. It's a big one. That's what we're mainly focused on these larger permits. Once you get construction plans aren't required on everything. It's just where we've got public roads coming in or where we've got potential issues with stormwater. And so there are plenty of subdivisions and large scales that go through where we don't require construction plan review approval. But once they get their preliminary plans, subdivision and large scale, once they get their preliminary plans approved, they can go construct. And then at the end of construction, they need to have their engineer generate some as-built plans, which is their final submittal. And they're going to bring that submittal to us. Sometimes they bring it to us with all the signatures, which is what we'd prefer because it gets them down the road a little bit faster. A lot of times they bring it to us fresh and blank, just their plan, and we'll bring it to you. Darn right. We don't take a final submittal through tech review. We just send it up to our county engineer and make sure that his requirements from preliminary have been met in the as-built. Send it over to the road department to make sure that the roads are good. And then we've got a checklist for final that we go through, and we make sure that the plan shows everything that's required by the ordinance, which is shown in the checklist. And if it does, then we'll bring it to you. And but sometimes, they might be deficient on one item here. Well, we'll make that a condition of approval. We're not trying to hold up these people for 5 weeks just because they didn't put topo lines on their plan, when they had it on there from preliminary. Just a bad example, but you see what I'm getting. We can apply conditions of approval for a lot of reasons, and that would be one, and we wouldn't sign their final plat until these conditions were met. So large scale and subdivision, they're very similar, but one's inherently residential and one of them isn't. Large scale is triggered whenever the development exceeds 1 acre, all in one action. So we've had other developers come in and build 0.9 acres and then kind of thumb their nose a little bit, and talk about, oh, it's a farm. Well, no, it's not. But, and then they get everything addressed, get all their addresses, and then they'll open these businesses and maybe a little strip mall, but it was only 0.9 acres. They'll come through a little bit later after the dust has settled that one and do another 0.9 acres and then do it again. And then before long, you got a 3-4 acre development that basically didn't have any review. It's one of the things we're trying to tighten up. We've got a lot of things that we know that we need to tighten up, but there's some things that are just very obvious. Stormwater drainage report, preliminary and final, hopefully they match, but they don't always. Either way, we're looking for our county engineer to give his nod and his approval on stormwater, and the road department to give their nod and approval on the roads. After that, we're just looking out to all the utilities, make sure that they're satisfied, looking out to the health department for darn sure. But it's a state agency and we don't enforce state law, we enforce county law. And so the state is the one that's responsible for going and inspecting the sewer, the septic field installation and stuff like this. And they're the ones that actually sign off on the plat. We don't sign for anybody in the planning office. We sign for the planning code, and the road signs for themselves. The state health department does for themselves. We don't have a DEQ signature block, but DEQ is usually just mostly applicable on the front end whenever they're under construction. And so we'll sign, the road department will sign, and then the county judge will sign last. But we require the applicant and the developer to go get all those other signatures before they bring it to us for those last 3. So we've talked about large scale, subdivision, minor subdivision. I'm saving the best for last, you guys. That's CUP. Did you know cell towers also have to have CUPs? So it's not agricultural or single family residential 1 unit per acre, even though that little dude is probably only going to occupy, a couple thousand square feet. There's a lot of code involved with it. And I am very lucky that CETA handles all the cell towers and cell antennas. And so I can focus on other things and not have to worry about it. But I would say that she's been doing it long enough that CETA is an expert definitely on our cell code or cell tower or cell antenna code. And, but we require review and approval on that. And, you want to put up a cell tower, you got to have a CUP for it. Once you get your CUP, then we got to have an administrative permit for it, showing that the tower was reviewed by them, and then they'll send their report in and we'll send it to our engineer and review it. Then once everybody is happy, then we'll get that dude underway. A lot of times they have to switch out an old antenna and put a new one up. Got to have a permit for that too. Got to have some review on that. It basically comes down to weight. But, you know, their structural analysis of their tower has to be able to handle the change in weight from the old one to the new one. And once the numbers are okay, then we'll send it up to our guy, make sure he gives a thumbs up, and then we'll ship it back to him and give him a stamp, you know. Cell towers and antennas, you know, what would you say, Sita? Once a month, probably? Something like that. They're coming in. They're coming in. This is just out in the county. I have no idea how many are coming into the town, but we're getting them. We're getting them. I mentioned that there's a minor subdivision and that there's so many ways to exempt minor subs from coming to the planning board. Well, we call those exemptions. You know, we don't have to be totally creative every time, but mortgage split, family split, court ordered, you know, there's a lot of different ways to exempt a tract split from coming to the planning board, to exempt a minor sub from coming to the planning board. But once we have found that it can be exempted under one of those categories, we don't even call it a minor sub anymore. It's just an exemption, or it's just a split or a property line adjustment, you know, and we handle those. Nick typically handles our tract splits and our property line adjustments. And what would you say, Nick, 2 or 3, 4 a day?
I would say that maybe 4 a week, 3 or 4 weeks.
Okay. I'm sure we have heavier and lighter weeks, you know, and, but we definitely have some frequent flyers, some of our firms that hit us up every day, every week, you know, Blue, Bates, Jorgensen. There's a couple more, but yes, sir. Do you have a question?
Yeah, question in reference to that. I know what we're doing in the process of everything else. When we're doing those exemptions and everything and so forth, once y'all make those exemptions in-house, those also have to go to the.
Turn your microphone on. One more time. There you go.
When we're doing those exemptions and everything, and y'all are doing those in-house and everything, do those have to go through quorum court for ratification as well?
The only thing that we have that goes to the quorum court is the CUP.
Okay. All
right. And so we have all these exemptions, different types, but they pretty much have, with very little exception, have the same checklist that we're going to run by those. Now, we have minor sub. Let me back up just a little bit. Around each of our cities, you've got, or inside the city, you've got city planning. Outside the city, you've got county planning. Our purview is over the unincorporated part of the county. But state law says that each of the cities, based on the size of their population, their city planning purview extends outside the planning area, outside the city limits, into what's called an extraterritorial jurisdiction area. We just call it planning area. But basically what that means is they have the driver's seat on subdividing land. The state law says that they have approval authority. The city has the approval authority inside the planning area, and that the county planning only has authority for making comment. But our code, that's what state law says. County code says we have approval authority in the planning area, and that's the code that I exercise. And we don't ever get any pushback on that from the cities or from regional planning or even from our applicants. But, and also we've mentioned to especially Fayetteville and Springdale that we're planning on changing our code, and they're like, ooh, give us a little lead time. That way we can get in and change our code, because we don't want to leave the planning area off the table, you know. But when it comes down to it, a planning area split is another exemption. You know, we're in a planning area property line adjustment. It's another exemption. And we don't do minor subs in the planning area. So if you got 5 acres and you're splitting it into a 2 and a 3 inside the planning area, we're treating it like a planning area split. All these property line adjustments and track splits that occur inside the planning area, we require the city to review that and approve it before they bring it to us. And so if it doesn't have a city approval stamp on that, go fish. Take it back and bring it to us whenever you have city approval. And then we're going to look at access and zoning. Zoning, because that is our purview, they can't exercise zoning outside their city limits. And so we want to make sure that they're not creating a lot less than 1 acre. And access, that goes back to the county roads and everything, that they need to have access to a public road, because Arkansas is an old landlocked state. So if you don't have the required minimum amount of frontage onto the public road, which less than 5 acres is 100 feet, over 5 acres is 165 feet. If you don't have that, you can do a 30-foot access utility easement. We're good to go. So we got one or the other. And in my opinion, I know probably plenty of property owners would argue with me, but in my opinion, an access utility easement is pretty easy for us to ask for, since they're not coming to the table with the required minimum amount of frontage and stuff like this. And they're creating these small lots. Whereas whenever we enacted zoning back in 06, that was kind of something we were trying to avoid. But at the same time, splitting your property isn't something that we can deny without basing it on something. You know, it's not the right way to put it, but splitting your property in Arkansas is very objective. If you meet the checklist of what's required, then it's going to be approved. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to work into this new planning code that we're writing, in order to make those very clear to the applicant. And so they know what to expect on the front end, especially on these subjective permit, the CUP. A lot of times, you know, people are like, what can I do where I don't have to get this permit? Like, you can do agricultural, single family residential, 1 unit per acre. Well, I want to put in an Easy Mart. Well, you can't, not without that CUP. And what it boils down to is that the track splits, the subdivisions, everything like that, it's in the state of Arkansas says that this is what you have to do, and it'll be approved. And so we want to be able to write our code to be more in line with what the state of Arkansas requires, because most people are in the biz are familiar with what the state requires rather than what each individual county requires. And ultimately our goal is to make it more understandable on the front end of what the applicant and developer is going to have to submit. And they know that if they submit this stuff, that they can start planning on their development being approved. You know, we're not trying to say that everyone's approved, but we want want it to be a little bit more predictable, the outcome. And so this is what we're working towards. So exemptions, mostly just lot splits, property line adjustments, and things that we have determined that don't need to come to you for your review and your vote. Conditional use permits. And so the county is zoned to allow agricultural and or single family residential, 1 unit per acre by right. And anything that doesn't fit into one of those 2 buckets has to come to you for CUP approval. The CUP approval is very subjective in that the criteria for allowance of CUP, there isn't a checklist where you got to show all the neighbors on the plat. You got to, like on a subdivision plat, you'd have the neighbor info, you'd have the road info, and you'd have the topo lines. And once you got everything on the checklist, you can feel pretty confident that's going to be approved. Well, the CUP is very subjective in that it assesses compatibility with the neighbors existing uses that are already allowed by right. Okay. And so I've lived on my property for 20 years and this dude is wanting to come in and put an Easy Mart right next to my house. I should have some mechanism by which I can make public comment and, raise a flag. That way, I can at least be heard. And if my concerns are valid, then potentially the applicant and the developer would be able to address these and maybe even make some changes in order to be more compatible and mitigate some of this impact to the neighbors. And so I'm going to read to you the criteria for allowance of CUPs, and you'll note that the first three are very objective, and they're right there on the front page of the CUP. Maybe they're the second page. Well, either way, I'm going to read them to you. Okay, I see. 1, 2, 3, back of page 4 at the bottom, Article 10, criteria for allowance of conditional uses, and it goes on to the next page. Number 1, or item A in the application, that a written application has been filed with the planning office and the fee has been paid. Okay, that's pretty objective. 2, that the applicant has provided proof that each property owner set out in 11-204 has been notified by return receipt mail. So we send certified mail neighbor notification letters out to all the people, all the neighbors who have a property within 300 feet of this property boundary. And we've got a system that kicks out all those addresses for us. Number 3, that adequate utilities, roads, drainage, and other public services are available or inadequate or will be made available and adequate if the use is granted. You've got Arkansas RDOT law and Arkansas law says that all county roads have automatically 25 feet worth of right of way each side of the center line, so a 50-foot right of way. But whenever we have a development, we require 30 feet, and so on the development side of the road, and so you're going to be required to dedicate just a little bit more right of way, because odds are you're going to have some utilities in there. And so you've got right of way, and then your utility easement is 25 feet also. It's a 25-foot utility easement and building setback on the front of your property. And so your front building setback, 25 feet, is also utility easement. And then the right of way backs up to that. And a lot of times property line will go up to the center line of the road. And so potentially you might not be able to use the front 55 feet of your property. We get a little bit of pushback on that from time to time, but whenever it comes down to it, it's in our code, and we don't approve items that don't meet our code. But at the same time, again, we're pretty friendly folks, and we like to be able to have a good discussion with our developers and applicants. And if you explain, and maybe just draw out a little diagram and show, then a lot of times just that little bit of communication, you can get people's head going in the right direction, and then they'll come around. But either way, that's what's required, and that's what we're going to get from them, unless they get a variance. But that variance is going to come to you, Zoning Board of Adjustments. And so anyway, number 4. Now we're getting into the subjective criteria of allowance to CUPs. That the proposed use is compatible with the surrounding area. The applicant is always going to say that it is. I'm always going to hope that it is, but in reality, a lot of times it needs a little bit of work to try to make it compatible. Some of the compatibility conditions that we add to these CUPs are that you screen your dumpster, that you opaque screening material like privacy fence or plastic sheeting you can't see through, but it's all uniform material, where it doesn't look junky. Screen your outdoor storage. Screen any inoperable vehicles. We got an environmental affairs department in the county, and they have code that says up to 4 inoperable vehicles can be within view of the county road. 5 or more, it's a violation. And so they can build a privacy fence and kind of get around that. It's not getting around it. It's just coming into compliance, you know? Well, a lot of these conditions that we apply to these CUPs turn out being for aesthetics. But sometimes folks want to put, for example, a wedding barn right up on their building setback line. And then you've got a neighbor right over here that's, you know, they've got their home built up on their building setback line. And essentially you've got 20 feet of separation between a party house and a residence. And, you know, then that's when the appeals start flying. And what can you say? You know, we gather as much as we can, the due diligence and all that, and gather all the facts and present everything to you that we can. And we'd be feeling good about a project. Well, then public comment comes, and, you know, there might be 30 people sitting behind me to make public comment, but only 2 of them wrote anything into me and told me that they were opposed, and it just totally catch you off guard. It's going to catch you off guard too, because in that staff report, I'm going to tell you 2 people said something, but now I got 30 sitting behind me. And but when it comes up to it, these are very subjective, and there's nothing saying that they have to come communicate with me before they come here. As a matter of fact, we stopped sending neighbor comment forms out a while back, because it seems that whenever we get into analyzing all these comments in depth, that we might be communicating the wrong thing to the public and saying that, yes, community that lives around that wedding barn, you have the power to shut this baby down. And in reality, that's not quite the way we're looking at zoning, and it's not the way we're looking at land development. We want to be able to know what your concerns are. That way we can try to make this development better for them and for you. But whenever only 2 people write in and tell me, then I didn't have the other 28 people's comments in order to try to craft creative and practical, you know, conditions in order to try to mitigate some of this concern. You know, and in that case, in my opinion, it's best just to table the darn thing and send it through again. And we'll review the tape, and we'll write down some of these concerns and get this figured out, and try to write some good creative conditions in order to try to mitigate that impact and get on down the road. Once the CUP gets approved, it's going to go to the quorum court for ratification, and the quorum court code requires it to go for 3 readings, whether it's on ratification or on appeal, whatever. Well, the quorum court has the ability to make a motion, second, suspend the rules, advance that on to 2nd reading. And then they'll say, I motion to suspend the rules to advance that to 3rd reading. And I think they have to have 2/3 vote in order to suspend the rules like that, but there's 15 of them. But they can, at the one quorum court meeting, suspend the rules twice and advance that to 3rd reading and ratify it on the spot. If you got a lot of people sitting behind you that are opposed to it, then typically the JPs, whenever they vote, you know, either it will or it won't advance to 2nd and advance to 3rd, you know. But bottom line is it's out of our hands and it's out of your hands at that time, and it's on them. It's on the JPs. You know, we've done our job. We got it to the planning board and got a decision. And then next, it's up to the JPs to play ball however they want to play. And it's not our job with the planning office to try to influence JPs. It's our job to feed them the information that we have fed you and more if they ask for it. And by the way, all you got to do is ask for it and we'll feed you more. Believe me, it's not that we're underworked. It's just that we want to get you the information that you want and that you need in order to be able to review these properly the way you feel is proper. And so we're the planning board administrators, the planning office, and I sign plats and subdivision plats and large scale development site plans and everything on your behalf. That is if the checklist has been met and if your approval has been granted, then I'll sign on your behalf. Otherwise, it'd be the chair signing. And, but you know, I don't want to go out to the quarry every time I got to sign a plat and bring it to you. So I'll sign for you. Point of all that is.
And come by, all you have to do is tell me. Hey, Nathan, I've got a couple of things in reference to the CUP.
Please.
You had said earlier that part of that you had a cheat sheet that I'm assuming gives them everything they need.
Well-
I'm gonna reference this to one that we had last month in reference to, you know, I know there's been, you know, little rumblings that we spent a long time on one issue last month in reference to that. But, you know, just so everybody on this board knows where I come from, your time's valuable. My time's valuable. And when we come to these meetings at night and we're sitting here and Nathan and them have done all their job and got everything like they're supposed to, I expect those applicants to have their act together and to where that we're not sitting here trying to determine when they can be open, when they can, if they can serve food, and that stuff, in my opinion, should already be laid out by the time they get here. That makes it respectful for your time and our time. I mean, I don't have a problem if they want to put a business in or something like that, but I just think that there's some kind of semblance of where somebody has to have it together in order to present it. I can remember being on Springdale Planning Board, and they used to come in and ask us to just basically design the whole thing for them. And we would be there till 11:30 at 12 o'clock every night. So that's the reason why that I may push an issue. And if you disagree with me, hey, there's 7 of us on this board. Let's roll.
Let's vote. Yeah.
But let's vote. Let's do it. Or if somebody disagrees, by all means, speak up. You know, the other part of that, especially with these CUPs and things like that, you know, if you know, I don't care if it's in the city, if it's in the county, I expect it to look halfway nice, presentable. I mean, you know, to me, I'm not making the decision, what does Joel Kelsey think? I'm making the decision of what I think that the neighbors that are going to be around that applicant think, and what those people are presenting that they have to live around or operate around. So anyway, and then the only other thing I had was when they get contentious, that's my job as the chairman to make sure that I've got a timer or somebody, and it's 3 minutes per individual. And if they're speaking for a group, they get 10 minutes.
We've got that in the bylaws.
And that's in the bylaws, yes.
Let me provide a counterpoint to that.
Okay.
And that we don't have a lot of this stuff that you're talking about, building visual standards, hours of operation, parking count, stuff like this in our code.
Is that something we need to develop?
Could be.
You know, Nathan,
Could
I
be.
mean, you know, I think
But
to
it's
me,
hard to-
it would
it's hard
make
to
y'all's
apply the
job
same
easier.
standards.
It would make y'all's job easier, and it definitely makes it easier when they come to present before us.
No doubt.
So,
And so the CUP being the subjective permit, therein lies some of the heartache that goes along with reviewing and presenting the CUP to you, because I've developed such a big word. I wrote up this really sweet cheat sheet here that needs a lot of work, but what it does is it kind of gives the applicant an idea of what we have seen that y'all wanted in the past. Hours of operation, site distance, water, plumbing, fire, sewer, electric, noise, hours of operation, trash. How is it compatible with the neighbors? That's the big one. But
well, and that was where I was going with this, Nathan. I mean, if you've got
Yeah,
that cheat
how's it
sheet
compatible?
here, is there somebody in your office that sits there and says, well, okay, they've got this, this, and this? Like I'm going to reference last month, didn't really know when they wanted to be open, if they wanted to have music or not, if they wanted to feed people or not. I mean, to me, that was all stuff that if you're planning on doing something like that, that should have already been presented in something for y'all to have in black and white to be able to present to us, to where that we can make, you know, a good, honest decision on whether or not we think it's
Yeah.
viable, compatible, whatever. So, I mean, I don't know if that's something that y'all go down the checklist and say, okay, it's got this, and then say
we
there's
don't have a checklist for
say there's
CUP.
13 items there, and
Yeah.
you go, okay, they've only got 7 of them. Well,
Well-
we're not going to put it in front of them because they've only got half the homework done.
Right. You know, and we've been down this road, believe me. And when it comes down to it, we don't have that stuff in those items in our code. We've looked at Benton County at their approval criteria. It's much more objective, which is, I mean, it's just they do it like this. Oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. They've just got a compatibility matrix. This column is the proposed development. This is the existing neighborhood. He wants to do this. This is the kind of neighborhood. That's what they got to do. Look up B2. You look up B2, they've got to have increased setbacks. They've got to have no more than 2 stories. They've got to have 3-tiered planting of maybe not ornamental, but shrubs. They've got to have landscaping. They've got to be able to mitigate the visual and the sound impact, so privacy fence and or screen trees and buffering shrubs, whatever. Benton County has a different way of doing this, and we will be bringing some of that into our proposed code that we'll be bringing forth probably in the next handful of months.
Well, and let me state that the reason why I say that is I know there's some time and expense that they have to do in order to address some of those things that were very question mark.
Sure.
But if that's what you're looking at and that's
No,
what
absolutely.
you're fixing to delve into for your livelihood and this and that, I mean, heck, everybody's got to have a plan than just to say, we're just going to wing it. I mean,
Well-
we can't just approve a wing it.
No doubt.
We got to know strictly for the respect of everybody else around them. If that makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense, sir. And from our point of view, looking at the code doesn't require building floor plans. It doesn't require a lot of these things that y'all are asking for. And we can suggest it, but we can't require it because of the code. We can't require our applicants from the brewery that came through last month to provide architect plans because our code doesn't require it.
And is that because of the city versus the county or just because we don't require it?
We don't require it. It's not in our code. Our code looks at site plan, stormwater drainage, and roads.
Okay, is that something maybe we need to look at and change?
Maybe so, but you got to understand what you're getting into whenever you start doing that. If you're going to open a buildings office where we start issuing certificates of occupancy, if we're going to adopt that code, we have to enforce it. And so that's a whole new department
I got you.
with whole new staff and trucks and everything else.
I understand all that.
And,
Did that with
and
Springdale,
so
I understand all
is that a road we want to go down?
Yeah.
And there are those who think we should, and there are those who think we shouldn't. And so, so I've gotten through most of the criteria for the CUP. Another one is that the establishment, maintenance, or operation of the CUP, the conditional use, will not be detrimental to or endanger the public health, safety, morals, comfort, or general welfare. It won't be detrimental to. I mean, I can look up detrimental, but if we're looking at how is this going to be detrimental to the neighbors, the applicant is going to say one thing and the neighbors are going to say the other, and I'm going to say something else whenever I go take a look. And whenever it comes down to it, what we have to have are those signatures at the end of the permit on the large scale or on the subdivision. On the CUP, if it's less than an acre and they're not getting large scale, it doesn't have signatures. So they have to adhere to those conditions of approval. We'll go out and make an inspection, and then we'll sign a certificate of compliance and get them going, but no signatures. If it exceeds that 1 acre, then detrimental to basically comes down to whatever the health department says, whatever each of the utilities say, and in the road department, the county judge, and us, whenever we're looking at our checklist. And so that's about the only way we can take the subjectivity out of it, is just simply resorting back to those people who are signing. And health department, God, how could they not be important, right? Road department, same thing. All the utilities, same thing, but these are very subjective criteria, and it's hard to it's hard to please the board whenever the board wants one thing but the code requires another. I guess that's where I'm going with that. Number 6, the conditional use will not be injurious to the use and enjoyment of the other property in the surrounding area for the purposes already permitted, nor substantially diminish and impair property values within that surrounding area. We had a proposed red dirt pit coming in, must have been a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago. And we looked out in basically a radius around the area to see where all the other quarries and dirt pits are. And that side of the county lends itself to red dirt for some reason or another. I'm sure it has something to do with geology. But it comes down to it. The neighbors said, this is going to kill our property value. I'm like, well, what about the other 7 quarries and dirt pits that are within 2 miles of your house? And this one isn't within 2 miles. This is more, or whatever. So we reached out to the assessor and said, Mr. Hill, can you please just either provide comment, or provide a statement? Can you provide something to the body, to the quorum court, just an opinion about whether or not this is going to affect property values or not? And he come in and he said, I can't imagine this not affecting property values a little bit, but this and that, you know. And it seems like any sort of comment always comes with a qualifier, you know, and I sure as heck wouldn't be saying anything poorly about our assessor or any of the others. It's just that that's kind of how it goes in this biz. You know, everyone wants to make comment, but they don't want to be the ones to stop development. You know, they don't want to be the ones to kill it, because then they're going to be in that seat in circuit probably, or maybe even beyond circuit. So substantially diminished property values. Well, can you get a professional to back you up on that? That's kind of what we're looking for on that. Or some sort of quantitative data that we can hang our hat on, because all the qualitative, the subjective stuff is just, it's hard to review with. It's hard to provide an approval on an opinion. So, and the last one is that the establishment of the conditional use will not impede the normal and orderly development and improvement of the surrounding area for the uses permitted in the zone. And so, you know, if we put in if we put in this really huge development out here, is it going to prevent the neighborhood from organically expanding and growing like it might have already begun? You know, well, that one's a hard one to prove too, because how can you prove that this was going to grow into a community of 20,000 people and now it's only growing up to 1,000 because that development came in and you're missing out on all this revenue and everything else, or whatever. It's all subjective, 4 through 7, and therein lies the headache that we're up against with this zoning code. All of those 7 criteria were under item A, under the criteria for allowance and conditional uses. Item B says that if it is determined that there exist conditions that could be imposed by the board that would significantly lessen the impact of the aforestated, then the board has the power to impose said conditions, which shall be specifically set forth. And basically what that means is you all can apply conditions to the permit as well. The planners will look at this and we'll try our best to be creative and to be practical also, and look at precedent, look at past projects that we had and see that, yes, that other brewery or that other establishment did have hours of operation or did not have hours of operation. Well, isn't that interesting? Let me look at a couple more. None of them required hours of operation either. And so it's going to be a little bit harder for us to levy or apply the condition of approval outlining when you can and can't open your business, brewery or otherwise. You know, it's and I keep saying it, and so I'll quit saying it, but that is the hard part. The CUP is the hard part about this job. because it is so subjective, and I'm always dealing with two different opinions, and trying to bring them together, trying to make them happy, is something that I've gotten used to not doing. What can I say? You know, we do our damnedest, but sometimes that just isn't good enough, and so we just learn to keep moving. But B says that you can add conditions to the permit on the spot, and then they would make the motion, make a second, approve that dude. Well, tomorrow, the next day, whenever I get home or get to work, I would pull up those conditions that I presented to you, and then I would start adding to them all the conditions that you proposed or voted to approve, and then we'll get those into a document and get those to the applicant, and we'll keep moving. And if they don't agree with it, even though it got appealed, even though it got approved, the applicant doesn't approve, well, they can bring it back to you. Appeal a board decision back to the board. It doesn't have to go up to the quorum court. They can appeal it to you for a different outcome. And the outcome isn't just approval or denial. It can also be approval with conditions. You want to get those conditions approved. And so, ultimately, we want to be able to communicate, and we want to be able to communicate timely. And so if we could get those conditions from you that you are proposing before the meeting, and we can get them to the applicant and get them on board, have that conversation, and then present the full list of conditions to you at the board, ultimately that's preferable. But I've kind of lingered on CUP for a while.
Can I ask a question? on
Bottom
CUP?
line is CUP is subjective, and it's not the same as the rest. And yes, sir, please do.
Okay, and I probably should know the answer to this, but in county, does this conditional use permit, does it run with the applicant or run with the land?
Runs with the land.
Okay.
And if you don't understand what he's saying, if the CUP was running with the applicant got approved to have an Easy Mart. They built their Easy Mart. Then they moved to the other side of the county. If it ran with the applicant, they could move over there and build another Easy Mart, and they'd be approved. They wouldn't even need approval. So it runs with the land. The applicant can sell that land, and another applicant come in and be the owner then, and that Easy Mart is still approved and still operating. So yeah, it runs with the land, and it'll stay there. And some of the municipalities, some of the cities will say that if that business went, maybe you can help me out with the word, if it went stagnant, or if it was not used for what it was zoned for a certain period of time, sometimes it's 6 months, sometimes a year, maybe 2 years, something like that, then it would revert back to its original zoning. And anybody who came in and purchased this land and wanted to keep using that now defunct storage unit or storage unit business, they'd have to come, even though it's built and it's on the ground, it's been sitting there rotting for 2 years. They're going to need to come back in and get that ball rolling again. And basically now they're not asking for permission to use the land for a storage unit. They're asking all of these folks who make the signatures, what do I need to do to bring this back up to your code, which might have changed since 5 years ago, whenever it was reviewed, and we need to get this dude refreshed. What's it going to take? And never done one like that, but just waiting. We've got a lot of defunct storage units. Sir. And so CUP, large scale, subdivision, minor sub, exemptions, cell tower. I said I was going to do CUP last, but I'm going to do ADU last. And this is simple. It's additional dwelling unit. We've got code that says single family residential 1 unit per acre. Well, you got 4 acres and you got 2 homes. You say, it's my family and my daughter and her family have moved into the second home, and well, now my son, he's feeling left out, so he wants to come build a house over here. Okay, So they'll send us a new address application because they'll have to have an address before a contractor will even come to the property to start looking about building that house. And and we'll look at every property on an address application when they come in and have the parcel number, look it up and say, oh, there's already a house there. Well, this is going to be an ADU, an additional dwelling unit. We want you to provide a perk test. You give us a perk test, we'll give you an address. But at some point, you got to cut it off. What if this is 11 acres? And, you know, all of a sudden, and then after a little while, how many kids do you got? Well, before long, you know, you've got 10 houses, 11 houses out there. And I know there's a couple properties out there in the county. I can drive you to one. But that example aside, we cut it off at 3. We cut it off at 3 residences on one property. Even if they've got 20 acres, they need at least 3 for those 3 homes. And this comes down to health department code, and that it's not that they want a full acre just per residence because you're having a septic system, because a septic system doesn't need an acre. We have other code that says that we can drop down to a 10,000 square foot lot, even on septic systems. If the health department will approve it, the city will approve it. And so it's not the health department requiring the one unit per acre, the 1 acre minimum per home. It was the intent of the zoning code back in 06, 05 when they were writing it, that they try to keep the lot sizes somewhat substantial. You know, I wouldn't say 1 acre is really substantial, but it's much more than 10,000 square feet, you know? And so you give us a perk test, we'll give you that second or that third address. Beyond that, it's a residential CUP. And we do a CUP whenever they're exceeding the 3 homes on one property, or if they're exceeding the 1 unit per acre density, if they want to put a second unit on 1 acre or a third or fourth unit on 1 acre. Keeping in mind it's about compatibility with the neighborhood and their existing uses. So we're going to look out and see about if we've got smaller lot sizes in some of the subdivisions within a reasonable distance from this property, you know, or along the main thoroughfare that takes you to the property. You know, we just kind of want to see what the neighborhood is comprised of. And the same with commercial. You know, we put a Dollar General out on 412 East out in the middle of a cow field. You know, you selling cow food? I don't know. But we need to look. I know it's a terrible joke, but we're always just looking out to see if there are other businesses and what they are doing. And if this is just going to be a sore thumb out in the middle of the rural part of the county, in which most people say, I didn't move out to the rural part of the county for this to happen in my backyard. Well, you know, there's another saying in planning, and I love saying it, Nick knows it, but a borrowed view is on borrowed time. And so if you don't own that view, maybe you should buy it, or someone's likely to put an Easy Mart on it or a dollar store. And there you go. So the ADU up to 3 without a CUP. And I've gone through several things here. The next item on my list was to kind of go over this calendar real quick. Well, I'll tell you, I promise I won't be quite as long-winded on the rest of my presentation as I was on CUP, but the CUP needs it. And I could have gone a lot longer on the CUP just going through some of the examples. But this calendar here, it's based on a 5-week cycle. And on the 4th column, you have the planning board meetings. That's whenever we're going to be meeting and have our hearings at 5 o'clock. Well, the next day, you can see the first planning board meeting, January 14th. Back over second line, left column, you'll see the submittal day for the next cycle, January 15th. It's the next day, it's Friday. All those planning board meetings are going to be Thursday night at 5. All the submittal days are going to be Friday. Our first deadline, once we have new submittals, is to put together a technical review packet in order to send out to all these jurisdictional reviewers, all those utilities, the health department, the fire marshal, the road department, et cetera. We're going to take the submittal and we're going to break it down by most of these categories on the cheat sheet. And we're going to technically describe it basically in order to send it out to all these jurisdictional reviewers and say, here's what they want to do. What are your comments and concerns? And so they'll send those back to us and we'll tell them we need them by this date. And so they'll send those back to us. At tech review, we used to do a face-to-face meeting. We're not anymore. And we have found that we can handle that just fine via email. But we'll put all of those comments and concerns we've got from all these jurisdictional reviewers into one document, consolidated into one document, and send it out to the applicant and the agent, which is usually the applicant's engineer or surveyor, engineer usually, and say, here are all the additional stuff, the additional requirements, like the electric company wanted a 30-foot utility easement centered on those power poles. The water company wanted a utility easement or whatever, or your road is only built for a community with 5 to 10 homes, but this is going to be the 11th, 12th, and 13th through 17th homes. We got to have you build this dude up to the county road standard. It's going to cost you, and that'll kill a project real quick if they've got to build a road. But these are the things that we need to get back to the applicant and the developer at tech review. That way they kind of see what they're up against. And at this point, it's still all preliminary. And so I'm giving you all of these comments and concerns on tech review, and you'll notice resubmittals 1 week later. I need you to turn those plans around and get them back to me in a week. And if they can't do that, then they're really not dedicated to this project, because typically our comments and concerns are simple as that. Put in a utility easement, bump up that road, draw on some sidewalks. Where's your topo lines? Stuff like this, in which they can just add a layer to their drawing and reprint, probably in less than a day's work. I don't know. Maybe sometimes it's a few days work, but in my opinion, that's on them, not our reviewers. Anyway, so submittal, tech review, resubmittal. Once we get their second submittal after tech review, the resubmittal is number 2. And so we're going to get that on a Tuesday. By Thursday, we're going to notify the neighbors within 300 feet of the exterior property line with this now vetted second submittal that we've gotten from our developer applicant. And so our neighbors that we're notifying aren't getting the very first, very rough submittal. They're getting the better one, the one that's been gone through and it's been edited. We're going to notify the neighbors. And then the following week, we're going to put together a staff report in order to get out to you guys on Friday and that'll be tomorrow, before next week's Thursday meeting. So they'll come out 6 days before the meeting, and it's by ordinance. And so these deadlines are by ordinance. And if we don't meet a deadline, then you can pretty well bet me and that planner will be in there the next morning, even if it's Saturday, especially if it's Saturday. We'll be in there working, getting that thing out. Sita's been there with me on Saturday. I don't think Nick has yet, but me and Sita. And then we're going to take it to the planning board, and then a CUP is going to go ahead and go on to the next meeting at the quorum court for ratification. It may go to 3. It may go to 1 or 2. It'll just be up to the court at that point. But we've got a pretty good system, I like to think. And I like to think that we're very familiar and acquainted with it, and that we're good enough at our planning board projects that we can also cover all the administrative stuff going on in the office, as long as we deal out the work fairly evenly, that no one really gets overwhelmed for very long at a time. We're all going to get overwhelmed a little bit from time to time, but we don't want that to persist, I guess. So I've talked about basically all of our projects, CUP criteria, what a typical review looks like. And the only thing that's really left is, what does an approval look like? Well, the CUP is going to go to the quorum court for ratification. And when something gets ratified by the quorum court, you know what the resulting document is, or what that results in is a new ordinance. And so if you come to me with a CUP request and it goes through and gets all the approvals and ratifications that it needs, 3 or 4 days after that quorum court meeting, Patty Burnett, the quorum court coordinator, is going to send me that final filed ordinance that was generated for that CUP request. And it's for your request specifically, with all of these specific conditions of approval that were approved. All of that is written into the ordinance. So you got an Easy Mart and you don't like it, and he's having a live band in a keg party out in the parking lot at Easy Mart, and you know that just doesn't quite allowed. You can look. Keg party is a bad idea, or it's a bad example, because I wouldn't write that into the conditions anyway. But the point is you can look up that ordinance. You can call me up and FOIA me, or just simply ask, can you send me that ordinance so I can see what those conditions are? And I'll say, of course we will. And I'll send them off, and you can see, and you will see that that these things were conditions, and nowhere in there did it say that he could have a live band out there from 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock. And well, but it also didn't say that he couldn't, and so therein lies another matter of interpretation of the code. And it might be that we write an ordinance that says there's no outdoor amplified music allowed, and then somebody could look at our existing ordinances and they would say, well, there's nothing in the ordinances that says that we have to have a permit to have amplified outdoor music. It's like, ugh. That's when I call the attorney and put it on him, because, honestly, matters of interpretation of the code, my first call is going to be to the county attorney. If my applicant or my neighbors who are neighbors to the applicant that are complaining, if there's a big enough issue, then we can bring it to the ZBA to make a determination on matters of interpretation of the code. So it could be that we would bring outdoor amplified music request to the ZBA for Mr. Shackelford's Easy Mart out at Goshen. So, so just no. So I've talked quite a while. The CUP, what does an approval look like? The CUP ends up in an ordinance, large scale or a subdivision or a minor subdivision, ends up with, you've got your plat or your plan for your large scale. I should define plat. A plat is one document that is splitting and conveying property. Typically you would have an easement or a right-of-way dedication form that you would fill out and have other people sign and everything, but the property owner to sign to dedicate the property if it was an easement or a right-of-way. But on a plat, that's when you're showing several properties resulting from one. Would you agree with that? And a plat is what is used to show, it's like a survey that's splitting property. On a large scale, you're not splitting property, you're just showing your stormwater and your access strategy, and so that's a site plan. But both of those, the plat and the site plan, so the plat's on the subdivision, minor subdivision, and then the large scale site plan, all of those result in having a lot of signatures on them by all the utilities, the health department, the road department, everybody else, the planning board administrator, the road department, county judge always signs last. Once you get all those signatures, then the applicant can go file it, the circuit clerk, third floor. So what does an approval look like for a large scale subdivision or minor sub? A filed plat. We don't have approval letters that we give out really, but we do on exemptions because, there really aren't too many signatures on those. There's a stamp, but you get both of them. You get a stamp and an approval letter. exemptions, you know, in ADUs. What's an approval look like? Well, you got that address that you originally wanted. So, you know, it's basically approved because you got what you've ultimately came for. But the big difference in those is, again, the CUP versus everything else. And since all that being said, we realize and we accept that our planning code isn't perfect and it hasn't been changed in a long time. It's been added to a little bit in the form of one ordinance or another slowly. But what we're looking at doing is, and what we have done is we went through the entire Chapter 11 planning code and identified everything that we had an issue with and made notes. And then now I'm going through there and trying to rewrite each of those sections according to what the notes were, you know, and instead of going through and repealing section 11-202.2A6, we're just going to rewrite the whole planning code and repeal and replace. And it's not going to be a complete replacement, but it's just easier to do it that way than it is to go through one by one. And so that's what we're looking at. And some of the things that we're looking at changing are adding real zoning. You know, we've got to define several more zoning types and a process by which we can rezone properties to them before that can occur. And that'll be a function of the Zoning Board of Adjustments to rezone properties once we get this new code adopted. So adding real zoning, coming with the real zoning is going to be a future land use map. So we've got a whole map of the county and we've got all the cities in there. We might as well just hatch all the cities because they don't count in our zoning. Don't even think about the cities, but they have a bit of a purview inside the planning area, but only for subdividing the land. And that's it. We got zoning, we got roads, we got stormwater, everything else. And so in our subdivision code, we'll be looking to what the cities, actually we're going to be putting it onto the cities where we only provide comment according to state law. And then the city will be the final or the only approval on that. We won't be providing approval in the planning areas. On this future land use map, we've got, I don't know where Dr. Otta is. Is he around here anymore? Is he gone? We're very lucky, in my opinion, in our GIS department. It's one man department, you know, but he's his PhD in environmental dynamics. And Sam is a real smart dude. And you can just ask him. He's real good for talking through a problem and kind of coming to a solution. And if you're not familiar with what GIS mapping is you can gather all this data that's either points, lines, or polygons. So you got point data, location. You got line data, which is a path to get there. And you've got a polygon, you've got a jurisdiction. Points, lines, and polygons can have so much data associated with one of those three. And then you just start analyzing this data according to this data. What's happening inside that jurisdiction north of that line, north of 412, you know, and you can start breaking it down. What's happening north of 412 in whatever, you know, up there in Springdale, in houses that are more than 2,000 square feet. You know, if you've got that data, then you can flesh it out and you can get it down to the result that you want or that you're looking for. And so Sam is our GIS mapping technician, and we get a lot of requests from people in the county to ask us to make some maps for them. If you call us up and have questions, and if it could come down to a function of GIS, then I'm going to get Sam in on this conversation too. But having to do with a future land use map, we've got all these CUPs that we have approved in the past, and we've got a list of them, and we've got a parcel number for each of them. And so we can put a star on that parcel on the entire county parcel map and show you where all the CUPs are. And then we can apply like a heat map type strategy or lens to it, if you will, and start looking where a lot of these are occurring. Maybe not the 3 or 4 residences on 3 or less acres, but like all the commercial stuff. We can look where that is mostly occurring. And I'm here to tell you, it's going to happen on thoroughfares and at intersections. And then everywhere else is basically the word I'm looking for is escaping me, but those are outliers. They're not necessarily following the pattern of suburban development, but most things out in our rural county don't. And so that is another one of the issues that we're up against, is avoiding spot zoning based on where all the CUPs are approved and where they occur, instead of writing a criteria by which we're going to apply. This is going to be a C1 area, commercial 1, commercial 2. This is going to be industrial 1, industrial 2, or residential R1, 2, 3. The spot zoning is the issue that we're going to get a lot of pushback on, and so we're just going to go for it. We're going to generate that first map, and we're going to take a beating, and then we're going to go back and we're going to try to make those changes smartly. And that's going to go back and forth from us to committee several times. And hopefully, I'd like to think that we could get this through quorum court by the end of the year. But I think that that's going to be a full-time job. So we've got, what are we changing and why? We're adding real zoning, the future land use map, subdivision, minor subdivision based on health department and planning areas. So I told you about the subdivision, minor subdivision, the subdividing of land inside the planning area, the approval authority, we're going to give that to the city as per state law, and we will be subject to providing comments only. But our comments will be based on stormwater drainage, roads, and whatever our existing checklist is. One thing that conflicts between our code and the state health department code is subdivision review. And so you can subdivide your land and it'd be an exemption in my office. And then you get your approval, you take it to a title company, get new deeds drawn up, file those, and you take them to the assessor, split my property, please, according to these deeds. And you could go through the whole process and even sell a lot and not have ever known that you would have needed state health department approval because you split it into 3 or more pieces, three or more pieces where any of those were 3 acres or less. 3 or more with 3 or less, they call it. 3 or more lots where any of them are 3 or 3 acres or less. That has to go to the state health department engineering section for subdivision review. And as it stands now, nothing in our office is really going to the health department unless it's a full subdivision. And so they haven't been commenting on minor subdivisions for quite a while. But as you know, we might do a minor subdivision and he might have 5 acres and create a 2 and a 3. And that's not 3 or more. So that wouldn't go to the health department for subdivision review. But maybe they had 6 acres and they created 2 and 2. You know, it's still not a full-blown subdivision. We could still handle that as a minor sub. And and it's not in our code to require the applicant to send it to the state for subdivision review. It's in the state's code, but someone has to tip them off. You know, someone has to tee them up to know to take a look at this. And so we're wanting to make sure and write that into our code. That way on the front end, our applicants and developers know what to expect and they know where to go and they know what they need to pay for so they can submit for these approvals. Lastly, I've got on my list is planning areas, and we've talked about it quite a bit. You've got cities of a first class, cities of second class, And those are just based on population, and I forget the thresholds. But Fayetteville's population at one time dictated 3 miles, and then now it's dictating 1 mile. But you'll find some places where the planning area extends out farther in some areas, and then you'll have this big old development. This big old development that Fayetteville didn't want to have anything to do with. And so they'll bring their planning area right around that development. And that's all county, even though they're surrounded on 3.5 sides with planning area. And we would like to be able to eliminate some of that subjectivity from even that aspect of planning, because, it seems like not playing by the rules almost. And we want to, but at the same time, it's because those rules are not defined. We've got a whole lot of rules we need to define. And so, I don't ever quit, y'all. So they'll tell you. So let me quit and let me ask. Please do start asking questions. I've covered a lot here, and I've been talking for, good gosh.
The first question I'm gonna ask is, I'm assuming new business, planning 101, general questions and other business was all in that presentation.
That's how I do it, man.
There you go. So does anybody have anything else? Any other questions, anything like that? Or
I've got a couple and then I'll quit. I promise.
Okay.
Okay. First of all, you mentioned in the new zoning that you're working on, there'll be a lot of back and forth between you and the committee. What committee? Who do you present your preliminary findings to?
So our preliminary thoughts are going to come to y'all. And we're going to go back and forth, and it may be that we have 3 or 6 items on the agenda for a planning board meeting that we can probably knock out in an hour. And maybe we spend another hour talking about a third, maybe the front third of chapter 11, which is the planning code. And we could talk about that in pieces with y'all. But when I was talking about committee, anything that goes to the quorum court, which this would have to, because it'd have to be adopted by ordinance. Anything that goes to the quorum court has to go through committee first. And it's county services. There's budget and finance, county services, and there's a few other committees. But pretty much anything coming through planning would go to the county services committee. And that's not a committee of the whole. I can't remember. I don't want to tell any lies on that one, but I think it's a little bit smaller than the overall full quorum court. And either way, so the proposed changes would go to committee first, and they would make their comments, notes, and we'd do it again. And finally, they're going to be satisfied, maybe to send only the first third of that on to the quorum court for their review and comments, and so it's county services committee.
Okay. And then a follow up to that, obviously you hit a hot topic when you said spot zoning. We talk a lot about spot zoning. So do you envision commercial nodes, industrial nodes, that sort of tracked through the municipal or unpopular or the county area?
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Pockets based on where others have started that ball rolling. But I don't want to say, and I don't want us to act as if just because this CUP got approved, that means that more commercial requests are going to be following, because it's not the case, and it's case by case. And I mentioned earlier that they're wanting to put a Dollar General out on 412 East. And so we're going to look around the cow fields and we're going to see if there's any other commercial activity out there. That's just our SOP, and we're going to present that to you because that might come up and that might be interesting to you. But at the same time, that shouldn't necessarily affect your vote on whether or not there are other commercial activities out there, because this is the rural part of the county, and so spot zoning, yeah, that's one thing we're going to look at, is where a lot of the others occur. But with GIS, you don't have to, you can do several levels of analysis and really shake it down even more, meaning we can look at where a lot of the existing CUPs occur. Well, then we can look at where their proximity is to large thoroughfares and intersections and a quarter mile out from intersections. And if they occur within these areas, then they get a higher level of hierarchy, you know, and then we might do C1, C2, C3 levels of hierarchy like that, requiring different levels of mitigation of more setbacks, more planting and screening and stuff like this based on where it fell within that hierarchy. So, you know, we understand spot zoning and we understand the limitations and the issues with spot zoning, but at the same time, it's hard to avoid it completely, because this is about compatibility, and you know, it also has to do with where the traffic is coming. You know, I can show you a dozen ways to get back to my house over on Weddington, but if I live on Ball Road outside of Goshen, there's only two ways, man. One way or the other, you know, and so out in the rural part of the county, it's less about spot zoning than it is about being practical and, you know, and wanting to establish some areas that are more likely to need this kind of attention. You know, we're not going to be rezoning properties to commercial only. For example, it'll be everywhere. We'll still have agricultural single family SFR1 by right, but then we would rezone properties to commercial upon request, but it would basically be ag SFR1 commercial. You know, ag SFR1 is always going to be allowed by right. And so, but now I've got exceptions.
Yeah, I was just
Start-
going to say,
starting to
so
hit-
then there's conditional
starting to
use
hit-
permit if
there's
it's
gonna
not a
be
use by
exceptions,
right.
You know, and
Yeah. Okay.
yeah. And so we'll do zoning, we'll do rezoning, we'll do variances, and then we'll see how it goes, and it's not going to be a perfect plan, you know, and we'll get what we can approved, and then we'll start trying to improve it from there, you know, so good question.
One last question, then I'll stop. And it's on your calendar. I mean, that's great to have that defined. Municipalities that I serve through, we don't have that. So if this board tables an applicant, it's a full table for 5 weeks. There's no special meetings for table, anything like that.
Correct.
Okay.
And one thing that we like to specify whenever you table a project is the length of time you're tabling it. Are you tabling it for one cycle till the next meeting? Are you tabling it until they're able to come to the table with a full approved stormwater drainage report? Because, you know, if they're using engineer X, that engineer might already be working on 6 other jobs, you know, and he might not be able to get to you within the next 5 weeks, you know, and so it's typical to table to the next meeting, but we take it on ourselves. If you table them to the next meeting and we see that they're not ready yet, we will table them behind your back. Okay.
I just had 2 questions. One, just as a clarification on the ADUs, when you say 1 acre per house, I just wanted to clarify that. Are they 1 acre apart? So if someone has a 5 acre site, could they have 5 houses like within 100 feet, or are they?
Yep.
Okay.
And when I was saying earlier that the 1 acre minimum is somewhat rooted in health code. Health code isn't the end all be all of our zoning. It's just sometimes it's just as easy to say 1 acre per home, especially when you're talking about ADUs, than 1 unit per acre. And so 1 unit per acre, but 1 acre per home. But yeah, they can, but they've got, it's not building setbacks, but it's like building separation based on the fire code. I think it's 20 feet. You probably know that one better than I do, don't you? Is it 20 feet? Depends, building type, I guess. Okay. So, and another question?
Yes, this one's just a little more of an admin question, but how do you handle public calls? Because I did get a call prior to our last board meeting on the Corey, and it was their lawyer representation. And I didn't take the call because I wasn't sure what I could talk about, couldn't talk about. So I just was curious, how do you handle public calls, and if there is anything you can or can't talk about?
I like to think that our office is completely transparent. I don't want to keep secrets from anybody. And I sure don't want them keeping secrets from anybody, and secrets isn't the right word to use, but all that's going to do is open us up to trouble, and that's trouble that we don't want to have to deal with and shouldn't have to deal with. And so we'll give any information that people call us up or email us to ask for. Sometimes we are busy and we need to, put that on a list and get to it when we have time. But I mentioned that we don't send out neighbor comment forms anymore. And I mentioned because a lot of times the neighbors they gang up on each other. How else do you put it? They will, and they'll gang up on each other and they'll get a project shut down. And that might not have been the best solution, was just to completely shut this thing down when all they really should have done is just build a privacy fence, this kind of thing, And so since we stopped sending comment forms out, we're getting more calls and more emails. And we log them, and whenever the project, you can tell on the front end if a project is going to be contentious, controversial for the most part. Sometimes one will surprise you, but a lot of times whenever we have a project that we know is going to be somewhat controversial, we'll just go ahead and start that spreadsheet, name, address, parcel, in favor or opposed, and then what was their comment? And I'll have all these columns and I can sort it, and I'll log you the next time you call too. I was like, oh, you called me 2 weeks ago with the same darn complaint. But the point of all that is what we really need to do is get that information to you. And I've told people 100 times in the past that a lot of times it feels like what my job really is being a hub or a middleman of information. Something comes into me and I need to organize that and I need to file it, and I need to know, who do I need to get that out to? I need to get that out to all these people. That way they can make an informed decision. If I've got 11 people all griping about the same thing, about that CUP, you better believe I'm gonna try to touch on that in my presentation and try to come up with a good solution, and apply a condition in the conditions of approval to try to mitigate that impact. But you can't always, because it's just simply, we don't want it out here. We didn't move out to the country for someone else to enjoy their property, and they happen to live next door to us. And so what it comes down to, and I've said that 100 times, what it comes down to is getting you the information. And then come Friday after the planning board meeting, we're going to start it all over. And we're going to beat the next people with the same stick that we beat these people with. And so,
When that applicant or that neighbor contacts us as a board member, correct? We take that call, there's no restrictions.
I will tell you what I've done in the past, since I've served on these for a number of years. I'm one of those people that I'm going to return an email. I'm going to return a phone call. If it's an email, I basically put in that email, thank you for your input, and I send it back to them. That's all I do, because it can go on and on and on. If it's a phone call and they call me, I'll call them back. I might listen to them. I'll tell them, thank you for your input. see you at the meeting or whatever. If I have a conflict of interest, I will let them know right off the bat, I have a conflict of interest. I don't feel comfortable discussing this, but I appreciate your phone call. That's how I handle it. But, however y'all want to, I mean, that's up to each and every one of you, but that's how I've handled it for years.
Is there anything on the bylaws about it? I don't think. there is.
Absolutely. I don't leave anything there that can, or the possibility that you don't answer. And the next thing you know, so God, they got a new board member. He didn't answer nothing.
Yeah.
I at least give some kind of response to where that they can't say that I didn't reach back out to them.
There's nothing in the bylaws that says you should or shouldn't.
Absolutely.
And so it's my opinion that is up to you. And if you don't want to, they'll probably call me and I've got your back every day.
Hey, and I will tell you, people that I've served with on boards, they're just like that. They will not answer a phone call. They will not answer an email, but that's their prerogative.
Yeah.
So,
I deal with angry people. And I'm just a pretty darn happy dude. So that's usually not what they're expecting when they get me on the phone.
All right, what else? Anybody else got anything? All right.
Is it appropriate at all for me to make a brief comment? Or is that inappropriate? If it's inappropriate, we will not do it.
I don't have a problem, sir, especially since she's a loner here.
We've also got. I mean, the thing about it is.
Oh, do we? Okay. Okay.
I mean, that was the thing that I was
Go
trying
ahead
to
and
do.
speak into the microphone. Since it's recorded, we'll go ahead and have you on the record in the mic.
Thank you.
well, and let me say this before we start. Like I said, I wasn't going to open it up for public comment since it's just a training session and everything, and we've gone basically 30 minutes more than we've asked these people. So I'll ask you to make it brief, if you will. Thank you.
Absolutely. My name is Ashlyn Gagnon, and I am the owner of the Contentious Project. We've referenced a couple of times the brewery that came through last time. Something that, first of all, I came here today just to learn more about this process and to put a face to the business and to the project and to the board. So thanks for letting me be here. I've learned a lot. The thing that I wanted to comment on is primarily in the CUP process, as someone who is going through this process currently. Can you guys hear me? Do I need to take this off? Okay, I don't know what's appropriate or not anymore, so I'm talking about a mask for those online. All of that to say, as someone who is going through this process right now, it is incredibly vital that the information like a CUP cheat list and cheat sheet is given to those applications prior to the meeting. So we all know that what happened with our project last time was a disaster. It looks like we were unprepared. We're actually incredibly prepared. So you will have that packet of explanation, and it was supposed to be a letter of explanation. It's now a packet of explanation that will be coming your way. We had all of that information, but did not receive the cheat sheet information until after that catastrophic meeting. And so as someone in the process, it is incredibly valuable to have that. And so I just am in full support. That cheat sheet is invaluable. We need to get that to applicants. And for those who are going through the process, there's just nothing that could matter more than having what you need. And sometimes you just don't have that on the front end. So we value your time. We appreciate your time. And we certainly don't want to waste it. So we look forward to the meeting next time. And we'll have an updated packet for you actually by tomorrow. So.
All right.
Thank you. Good to
Thank
meet
you,
you
ma'am.
all.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Okay. I think we've got one person online. And like I said, I'm going to ask for respect since this is a planning meeting and not an actual planning board meeting. So I'll limit the time to brief for 3 minutes or less.
Okay, thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me?
Do I have to let them in or?
Hello?
Gary, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
You can't.
Can you hear me
Hold
now?
on just a second, Sherry. We've got technical and we're going to try to get your volume turned up so we can hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
That's not a particular seat and I don't have to hit it, do I?
don't think so. I could go longer now.
Can you hear me now?
Miss Main, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
I'm going to take that as a no.
Well,
Oh, you can't, oh, you can hear, but it's muted?
Can you hear me now?
Jerry, try it again.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, barely.
That's barely back
Go ahead and
there.
ask your question and I'll repeat it to the board.
Okay, I just have a couple of comments, Nathan. And I wanted to ask about, what about existing commercial activities that were grandfathered before countywide zoning that don't have a cut? Are there going to be any type of wording in the new code plan to address those? And then also, my second question is on a cut for agri commercial, because I know it's getting very popular with the growing marijuana facilities kind of in our area, and they're more in Benton County, but they're coming this area. So is a requirement going to be for a commercial marijuana growing facility? Is that going to be an agri commercial cut? How is that going to be addressed?
And thank you for asking. First of all, touching on the grandfathering existing commercial properties and uses, we don't have language in our planning code. Now, I understand that there's language in the para task force code, but in the planning code, we don't have language for grandfathering properties. And so we'd be looking at those case by case. Now, we're not going out into the county and looking for who is operating as commercial versus who is, we're not going out and looking at who is operating at what level of commercial activity. It could be a home-based office, an accessory commercial unit, an ACU. It could be an Easy Mart. It could be, something much smaller, maybe small engine repair that's been there since 2000 or longer. We don't have the language in our code to guide us and tell us how to deal with these properties or these commercial uses that have been in effect since before zoning. And so that's something we're going to have to look at for sure. And additionally, I'm of the opinion that would solve a lot of problems if we could develop that language and get that into the County Services Committee's hands in order for them to offer other suggestions on how to word that. But as of yet, we don't have a way to grandfather properties. With the second question, the commercial agriculture, specifically the marijuana growing, right now, our definition for agricultural says something to the effect of for the production and care of agricultural animals and products, for example, but not limited to dogs, horses, and greenhouses. And I believe that the commercial marijuana production would fall into the greenhouse category, but that is something that we have not had defined yet in our new code, the proposed code, which there isn't very much proposed code written yet, but that would be something that, in my opinion, that we should expand upon. I have a lot of opinions on how the new code should be written, but when it comes down to it, it's that committee or it's this board, the county services committee, and the quorum court, who ultimately are going to be the ones providing the approvals and, in a sense, writing the new code. Now, I'm the ones with the fingertips on the keys on the keyboard, but they're going to be the ones to say, no, you have to change that section, and you have to change that section. Here's how you have to change it. And so I don't know how that's going to turn out. All I know is that it has come up several times. And most recently, the commercial agricultural has come up in the form of one of our property owners out in the rural part of the county putting up a rather large barn in which they're going to be training horses. And that interpretation, or anyone's interpretation of that portion of the code that says for the care and production of livestock, animals, and products, you know, I can see where somebody would not want a professional horse trainer coming in and training horses on a large scale at a barn off their road. And can see how they would say that that is not allowed by zoning because they're making money off of those, off of that service. But I can also see the other person that says horses are agricultural animals. And if we're going to start regulating that, then we have to start regulating chicken houses and everything else that's commercial, agricultural. And that's not something that we're able to do at this point. And not sure that I personally want to bite that off, you know, to get into trying to regulate chicken houses because it's going to be a big task. Right. And no doubt writing this whole code is a big task, but I'm not sure that that's one that my quorum court wants me to tackle. And so again, at the end of the day, what it comes down to is what can we get our county services committee and our quorum court to approve. And so commercial agricultural, that might be something that would be better brought up with the quorum court or the county services committee when the time comes.
Can you still hear me?
Because right now, mostly what we're talking about is the existing code and trying to bring our new planning board members on board with what our process looks like. And with respect to your first question, the grandfathered, about how we're going to treat properties that have been used as such since before we had zoning. I think that a little bit of grandfathered language in our new code would go a long way with that. And I think it'd be pretty easy to write. But again, we just need to write it in such a way that it'll make it through committee and the quorum court. And so I hope these answers are good for you. Yes, ma'am?
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to comment that was a couple of things that I think needs to be considered in the new code plan or tightening up, because the para, the way it's read, I mean, it can pretty much explain agricultural. So
Para task force protecting agricultural and rural areas.
Right.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Main.
All right.
Thank you,
With
sir.
that, if there's not anything else, then I'm going to adjourn this meeting. Thanks, everybody, for their time.